Hi everyone. So this is just an introductory lecture to the course POS 273. It's a course taught online in the Political Science Department at the University of Maine. And my name's Rob Glover. I'm the instructor for the course. So basically all I want to cover in this introductory lecture, introductory video, is to give you an introduction to the course and myself, talk a little bit about how we will study international relations in this course, and then run through some of the logistical features of this course. Assignments, grading, very important, and also one more important thing that you actually need to do right now to succeed in this course. So the first thing that you might want to do is, if you haven't done so already, print off a copy of the syllabus and have that in front of you, or have it open on a tablet or something. Have the syllabus in front of you in some way, so that as we move through the different features of the course, you can refer to it and maybe mark it up or make notes if you have questions or if anything's unclear. If at the end of this video, I'll just say this too, if at the end of this video anything is unclear, just feel free to shoot me an email and get in touch with me, and I can answer any questions you have. So you have the course title. It's a 6-week session. It's actually a little bit shorter than a 6-week session. The course content is available through First Class. We do use Blackboard a bit in this course. We use Blackboard primarily for exams. I think all of the course content itself, the lectures and any additional readings and assignments and materials like that are hosted on First Class. And if you're watching this video, you were able to access the First Class site for this course. So congratulations on that. But you will have to use the Blackboard site to take the exams. And so there is a link you'll see in the First Class folder that takes you over to Blackboard. But you might just want to double check right now that in addition to having access on First Class, you also have access to the course on Blackboard. Here you have my office hours, you have my contact information, email and phone. In general, in the summertime, email is the best way to get in touch with me. Usually if you email me, you'll get a response within a couple hours, probably 24 hours at the most, right? But generally much quicker than that. And phone is, you can use the phone if you want. It's summertime. I will be traveling a little bit as we move through this course. So I typically won't be in my office every day, but my phone number is there if you have it. And if you leave a voicemail, I will eventually get it. But if you need an immediate response, usually email is the best way to get in touch with me. Office hours, I'll talk a little bit about, because they function in a somewhat different way than they would for a typical course, obviously, because we're online. And I'll actually hop out of my presentation here and show this to you. So in the First Class folder for this course, you see all sorts of different things. You see, link to the syllabus and the different course modules, the discussion board, assignments and study guides. All of these links are going to take you to important material for the course. The one that I'll focus on specifically right now is the virtual office hours. Basically, it's a chat room, right? So if you click on this link, it opens a chat room. There I am, right? And basically every Wednesday from 12 to 2, for 2 hours, I'll just be hanging out in here. I'll have this open on my computer, and if there's anything that you want to chat about, maybe we're leading up to an exam, or we're deeper in the course and starting to move into this simulation that we're going to do, and you want to chat with me about that stuff, you can do so in here. I know that 12 to 2 on a Wednesday might not work for many of you. It's the summertime. A lot of you are working, you're traveling, you're doing internships, and so your schedules might be kind of difficult in terms of taking time out of the middle of your day and hopping into a chat room. If that's the case, we can set up an alternative time to chat. I also will note too that if any of you are local, if you're in the Orono area, greater Bangor area, and you want to meet face to face, I would be happy to do so. I'm happy to get together, in my office or off campus and chat about aspects of the course. So if those times don't work for you, the long and short of it is just contact me. We'll figure out something that works. So that's basically kind of the logistical features of the course, how to get in touch with me, the best ways to get in touch with me, how office hours work. Let me say a little bit about the content of the course. So this is a course in international relations. It's kind of the foundational course in international relations. International relations is a subfield of political science. And primarily what we focus on here is the various forms of interaction that happen over and above the level of individual countries, right? So we examine the types of exchanges that occur at the global level. And we do so really at a fascinating time to be studying this material. If you think of that category, right, things that happen over and above the level of an individual country or over and above the level of an individual state. Sometimes we'll use that term in international relations, the state, right? And there we're referring to countries. We're not referring to, Massachusetts or Maine or New York or California. Think about the types of things that happen at that level of interaction, and you have really interesting types of human activities and important types of human activities. So one major one that you see here is war and conflict. And for a long time, unfortunately, that was the main form of interaction that was studied at the international level was conflict and war between states. Diplomacy and foreign policy, again, states interacting diplomatically, whether it be related to peace and security or related to trade or related to cooperation on intelligence, cooperation on drug trafficking or human trafficking, whatever the issue might be, countries interact in all sorts of ways that are not simply conflict. They're diplomatic in nature. And so we study that as well. We study foreign policy. We study how countries craft a coherent vision for what they want to achieve in the world and attempt to use the power that they have to achieve it. We study trade and international commerce. You probably are all familiar with the term globalization and have some sense of what it means. Well, one of the key features of globalization is an explosion in the volume and the scale of international trade and commerce, and goods and services flowing back and forth between countries and across national borders. We talk about that quite a bit. Talk about something called international law. Law doesn't just exist at the domestic level. There is something called international law, and it is meaningful and important in many important domains of human activity. So we talk about that quite a bit. We talk about international organizations. So the most obvious example, and the one that we spend quite a bit of time with in this course, is the United Nations. But there are a slew of international organizations in which representatives from different countries try to communicate with other countries and coordinate with them on issues of common concern. So it could be trade, it could be peace and security, it could be the environment, whatever it is. There are venues in which that interaction happens. And so we look at those venues and try to understand how they work. Non-governmental organizations. So these are organizations that could either be at the domestic level or the international level. And they're not comprised of representatives from different governments. They're comprised of non-state actors. And we look at their role. And their role, depending on what we're talking about, can be very important. There are some very important, consequential NGOs, non-governmental organizations that exist in the world. And we also spend a lot of time talking about the environment. Many astute commentators have looked at the issue of climate change and the potential impacts it's going to have on our world. And they've suggested that this is really the existential concern of human beings in the world today. And unfortunately, climate change is of a scale, and it's just a type of challenge that you can't confront it as a single state without collaboration and cooperation, not only with other states, but really the entirety of the global community. And so the environment is really a challenge for international relations. Can we craft agreements and mutually binding um, uh, institutions and frameworks that enable us to prevent some of the darker, more bleak scenarios for what climate change could produce? That's an open question. Thus far, we haven't been very successful. We, and the clock is ticking. And the clock is ticking increasingly loudly, whether or not we will be able to address this issue in a way that prevents some of those nasty scenarios moving forward. So I'll say right at the outset that this is a challenging class. We cover a lot of material in 6 weeks. We basically cover the same amount of material that we would over 15 or 16 weeks in the course of an entire semester. I expect you to be present. I expect you to be doing the work, doing the reading, to be active in our discussion boards and interactions online, to ask questions if you're unsure. I want you to engage with this material. I don't want you to kind of passively interact with the course material, but I want you to be engaged. And it's also the nature of this class that the material we cover probably will not be immediately clear to you. It's we're delving into some of this stuff for at least some of you. It will be the first time you've encountered these concepts or you've encountered this material. So the material is going to be alien. It's going to be strange at times, and you may be confused, and that's okay. That means that you're learning, right? I know it can be frustrating, but if you're confused, if you're frustrated by something, it means that intellectual growth is happening. So don't worry about that too much. And definitely, if you're feeling like the material is too much for you, contact me and let's try to figure out, what is the challenging aspect and how can we address it. So readings for the course. Well, the kind of core reading for the course is this text, a relatively short text by Lamy and co-authors called Introduction to Global Politics. Basically, this is a text that exposes you to key concepts and theories. You examine some important topics in international relations. You talk about security, you talk about trade, you talk about development and the environment. So it's a survey, it's an overview. It's the third edition. Make sure that you get the third edition. Unfortunately, one of the tricky things about international relations is that because the material is referencing what is happening, literally unfolding in the world around us, the editions have to be updated usually every couple of years. So if you get a second edition or a first edition, it's going to be referencing things that are kind of out of date. And the most recent edition will cover material that's more contemporary. So that's one of the unfortunate things about teaching a course in which you're dealing with ongoing events, is that you have to continually kind of update textbooks, and so they can be a little bit more costly. I will say, though, relative to textbooks in the natural sciences or a organic chemistry book or something like that, this is much cheaper. So it's a little bit more expensive than maybe some other textbooks in political science, but it's relatively cheap compared to certainly kind of math and science textbooks. There are a few other pieces of this, a few other kind of readings for the course. There are occasionally modules and lessons within the course in which the material that you're reading is not in the Lamy textbook. It's available online in the first class folder for the course. So that is always marked on the syllabus, and kind of where to go. If you see that we're reading something that's not in the textbooks, then to go to the appropriate folder in first class and track down the reading there. And I think there are a few instances in which that's the case. There's texts that we bring in that are not from the textbook. There's also I think the last class is not actually a written text as such. It's a series of TED Talks talking about contemporary world politics. So in those instances, you would access those materials from first class, and it should be relatively straightforward where you find them. The other piece that I will talk about in more detail in just a second. It's not technically a reading, but it is course material. In this course, you participate in something called the ICONS simulation or the ICONS project. ICONS is a simulation platform that has now been in existence for about 30 years, 3 decades. And initially, it was simulations of global events and international relations that were in a non-electronic format. And then very early, once we had online connectivity and the internet and that sort of stuff, they moved to these online-based simulations of world events, and they have dozens of these things. They have security crises and trade deals and all sorts of different specific examples in which you engage with a set of readings, you inform yourself about material, and then you play the role of an actor in that specific simulation. The simulation that we're doing in here is of the United Nations Security Council, and all of you will be playing the role of a country representative to the UN Security Council, dealing with a couple of proposed resolutions before the UN Security Council. So that, I think, is a really exciting aspect of the course. It's a way to take an online course and give it this kind of experiential applied component in which you're applying the theories, applying the concepts in your actual practice. I'm a big fan and a big advocate of simulations. I think they can be a lot of fun. It does mean that you will have to access the ICONS website and get access to this platform, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. So it's not a book that you need to buy, it's not a text, but you do need to log on and gain access to this simulation. And it's not super expensive. It's about $13 to get access to this ICONS platform using a credit card or debit card. But that's just something to keep in mind in terms of materials that you will need to secure in order to participate in the course. Okay, so grading for the course. If you go to page 4 of the syllabus, you see details on these specific grading and class requirements, but here is the basic rundown. So the first thing that you're graded on in this course is participation in the class discussion board. So there is a discussion board for this class. When we hopped into first class, you probably saw it. This is really a venue for you to reflect upon and try to process the material that we cover each week. Basically, I expect 1 post a week from each of you. These should be about 300 to 500 words in length. They should be thoughtful, well-constructed posts in which you explore some aspect of the week's material that interested you. And you're making an argument with reference to evidence. So there should be a thesis statement, there should be something that you are trying to demonstrate or argue, and you should be backing up that argument or that demonstration with evidence from the week's material. Every week I'll post a few opening thoughts or questions, and you're welcome to respond to those. Your reflection can just be a response to those opening questions. But you don't have to. And one of the things I really like is when students explore something that they're interested in, right? So you can say, that those 2 opening questions are not really interesting to me, but I thought this aspect of the week's material was really fascinating. And so I am going to argue or attempt to demonstrate something in relation to that. Or, maybe you log on and you see a post by a classmate and you respond to an idea that they've raised. You kind of flesh out or articulate in greater detail something that comes up in someone else's post. Or maybe you see something that's posted by a classmate and you realize you don't agree with it. You have a different perspective. And so another way that you could approach the discussion post is by kind of fleshing out why you don't agree with them, right? What is the difference of opinion? Why do you have a different perspective on a topic or a question that's been raised? So all of those options are available to you, and you're really welcome to explore or discuss anything that is of interest to you. I do want to see evidence of reflection and thoughtfulness, and that you're really actively thinking about the material for that week and trying to process it. And also, if you're responding to someone else or you're asserting a position, then I want to see kind of civility, basically. There's issues that we address in this course, things that we talk about that are really difficult, and there's no single right answer to any one of them. And so it's important that we don't just kind of scream at each other when we disagree. So, as I've said, participation in the online discussion constitutes 15% of your grade. These are due every week. So, you want to kind of structure your moving through the class material in such a way that will enable you to submit these discussion posts on time. They're due on 8 p.m. at 8 p.m. on Saturday of every week. So you just kind of compose your posts, go onto the discussion board on first class and post it, and make sure you do so before 8 p.m. on Saturday. You also have 2 exams in this class, and those are going to be conducted via Blackboard. So there is a link on the first class page that will take you over to Blackboard. And I do that simply because Blackboard has better options for administering online examinations. Also, you'll be able to track your grades and your progress in the course through the Blackboard Grade Center. But that is really all that I'm using Blackboard for in this class. So it's important that you have access to it, but that's not going to be your go-to source for course materials and course content. You do get a study guide in advance of the 2 examinations, and they're pretty thorough. So I tell you exactly what I'm looking for. There's some different sections to the exam. There's a matching and a short ID and an essay section, but you get all of the material about all of the specifics about what material will be covered in advance of the exam. So those study guides will be really helpful. You also get the essay questions. I'll give you some different options for essays that could appear on the exam, and then I'll choose from those options, and then you have a choice of which one of the options that appear on the midterm or the final you would want to do. So there's no, I don't really have any tricks up my sleeve. I use examinations to assess whether or not students comprehend the material and can apply it. But I will say the one caveat to that is that because I give you information on exactly what is going to appear on the exam, and I give you the exact content of the essay questions, then I expect quality. I expect pretty well fleshed out, pretty well articulated, and well supported answers. And you should prepare ahead of time. You shouldn't wing it. You should know exactly what you're going to say and what evidence you're going to use to support it. So those are the 2 examinations. Together, they count for 40% of your grade. They count for 20% each. The most exciting, innovative, and I think fun aspect of this course is the icon simulation, which I mentioned. A simulation is just that. It's a course activity that is designed to simulate something that would happen in the real world, and in which you take on the role of key actors involved in that activity. So in our class, we're participating in a simulation designed to model the types of negotiations that happen at the United Nations Security Council. You will all be taking on the role of country representatives to the UN Security Council who have to negotiate and attempt to craft resolutions on some different international issues. Like the UN Security Council, there will be 5 permanent members who have what we call veto power. They can block any resolution. And then there's an additional 10 member countries who are non-permanent, or sometimes called rotating members, right? And they do not have veto power. So structurally, they have less power within the UN Security Council. We'll be preparing for the simulation individually in weeks 2 and 3, and then week 4, we begin informal negotiations between countries, and in week 5, we begin the actual formal negotiation in which you all have to attempt to hammer out resolutions and vote on them. For a resolution to pass, it needs 9 votes, and there can't be any vetoes from the permanent 5 countries. And so there's actually 4 different components of your grade that are related to that simulation. There's a pre-negotiation planning report in which basically you're learning a little bit more about your country, their role on the UN Security Council, their interests in relation to these issues, and that's 5% of your grade. There is your actual participation in the simulation. I want to see you actively engaged in the simulation. I want to see you contacting other countries, putting forth potential amendments to resolutions, really kind of like articulating your role in this simulation and trying to be an active participant in it. Halfway through the simulation, I ask you to assess how things are going and whether your You're planning the strategy that you laid out in the pre-negotiation planning report, whether or not that's working the way that you want it to, and any reflections or ideas that you had in relation to your initial plan. And then at the close of this experience, you write a reflection paper in which you think about what happened in the simulation, our attempt to simulate the UN Security Council in relation to the broader themes of the course, and try to grapple with the conceptual content that we're learning in the class, and some of the specific kind of history and context for what's happening in contemporary international relations in relation to what you did in the simulation. So all told, this accounts for 35% of your grade. It's the largest chunk of your grade overall. Okay, so you'll want to kind of be an active participant in this, and I think the course really will operate best when as many people are as actively involved in the simulation as they can be. So let's talk a little bit about the simulation. As I said, this is a simulation of the UN Security Council, which you see here, and you're taking on the role of country representatives, 5 permanent members, 15 rotating members, and I laid out the schedule. Right, so in weeks 2 and 3, you're kind of preparing on your own. We have these informal negotiations in week 4, and then formal negotiations and actually voting on resolutions in week 5. So there is actually one thing, even though this kicks up in a week and a half, 2 weeks. There is one thing that you have to do right now. The first is contact me through email on the email address that you regularly check. Right? So for this simulation, it's important that I be able to get in touch with you through email on the address that you regularly check. And I know that not everybody uses their Maine email, so if that's a Gmail account, if that's Hotmail, if it's something else, contact me on that address so that if I need to get in touch with you and provide information about something that's happening in the simulation, what's going on there, I can do so. Okay. And the other thing that you have to think about is country preference, right? So there are 15 options, which I'll actually provide you guys right here. These are the countries that are on the Security Council in our simulation. You are welcome to choose any country that you want, and I will do my best. If you have a preference for a specific country, I will do my best to align folks with their preferences. It is on a first come, first served basis. And because of some of the structural features of the UN, sometimes there are specific countries that are in high demand. Countries that tend to be in high demand, the United States is always in high demand because people would like to be the United States and think about our interests and our role in the world. And so the United States tends to be one that folks demand, and often more than one person will want to be the United States. But there are 5 countries that have permanent veto power. And so if you choose China, France, Russia, UK, or the US, that gives you a tremendous amount of structural power in the simulation. Right? If you say no, then the resolution doesn't go forward. So that sometimes interests people. Sometimes people want to be, have that veto power, be one of those P5 countries. There is also another role that might be of interest to you. So at any given time, there is a president of the UN Security Council, and that happens on a rotating basis. It's someone who is a country, a representative from a country who is on the UN Security Council will be acting as president. And in this specific simulation, it's Japan. Now, being president doesn't give you the degree of structural power that, say, the permanent 5 have with their veto power, but it does give you the ability to set the agenda and do some things with parliamentary procedure whereby you can potentially influence outcomes. So it gives you a little bit more structural power than just being any old rotating member. You also might want to choose a country based on a country that you think would be interesting to learn more about. So Colombia, for example, right? Colombia in the 1980s and 1990s really struggled with drug trafficking and criminality, and basically had an internal civil war playing out. If any of you have seen the series Narcos, it deals with that period quite a bit. And so maybe you want to learn more about Colombia. Colombia has come a long way. They're recovering from this period. Their economy, their political system is becoming more stable, and maybe you just think it would be really interesting to learn about Colombia. So you might choose a country based on those sorts of considerations. Okay, but the bottom line is you have to email me from the email address that you regularly use, and you have to let me know if you have a country preference. If you don't have a country preference, I will just assign you based on what's available, and that's totally fine too.